I'm here to tell you the story about how we revolutionized developer experience with 3.5 platform engineers at Kognic. And I'm the half, so I'm not trying to tell anyone on my team is the half. And the reason I'm the half is because I'm also the manager, so I spent part of my time doing management, and I did part-time hands-on while working on this. The reason why I call it story time is because this is my story, this is how we did it. I'm not telling anyone else to do exactly what we did, because maybe it's not a good idea. But at least I want to tell you and give the context of how we looked at it. The story takes place at a company called Kognic. We're a small startup or scale-up. We existed for 5 years. We turned 5 years this year. And it was founded back in 2018 as a company called Andersson, and then we rebranded last summer. The reason why rebranding, I will get back to that. But we have our headquarters in Gothenburg, Sweden. That's like 3 hours south from here. And in 2023, around now, we are somewhere around 100 people in the company and around 50 engineers. And why the reason I say around is because we have new people joining every week. So I'm not really sure exactly the numbers today. And Kognic is the data platform accelerating machine learning for performance critical applications. And if you want to know more about the company, what we are doing, you can come find me afterwards and I will gladly tell you more. But what I think is interesting for the context of this story is that Kognic is delivering a platform, a SaaS platform. And that means that we are running things in the cloud, we are running microservices, we are we host and own and run our own code. We're not deploying at clients, etc. So that is like part of the context of our story and the decisions that we make. Who am I? I'm the product area lead for engineering enablement at Kognic. I'm also a CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation ambassador. And I'm involved in Cloud Native Nordics community, which is part here in Oslo as well. And I've seen a few people around, so hey. I'm also a meetup organizer in Gothenburg. So I'm very involved in the community and like that a lot. If anyone wants to come to Gothenburg and speak at the Cloud Native meetup there, let me know. I would love to have you. And I'm going to tell you the story about like when I joined the company 3 years ago. It was June 2020. And we had some things in place, but most of the things had done on a need-to-be basis. So all the infrastructure, all the things running, all build pipelines, etc. It was just get it up enough to work so we can focus on building the product. I think this is really good, and it was really good for the company by then. And then we decided to do an investment to see if we could try to improve the developer experience. Hence, I joined the team. And then I want to tell you the story about 3 concrete tools that we used that actually helped us execute on a strategy. So first it will be some theory, then I will apply it and connect it to how we acted, and then I will give you concrete examples. So part of the context is how we structure our teams at Kognic, and we believe in cross-functional teams and autonomous teams. That means that the teams are driving their part of the product themselves. They own the full life cycle of the applications. They should be able to do all the things they need to do in order to deliver. And it looks kind of like this, but of course this is a very abstract example, where we have design and UX, we have front-end developers, we have machine learning developers, and we have back-end developers. And those developers are combining and working together in different teams to deliver a product vertical. So when I talk about developers, I'm talking about these different groups. And as many others that start working with platforming, we started focusing on the microservice architecture and not so much the design end of the things. But that's another talk, I think. So when I talk about developer experience, what do I mean by that? It's developer experience for me is like, what is the experience as a developer when you have to do all the things you have to do in order to be an autonomous team? So I will get back to that as well. So, but why do I care? Why do we even look at these things? And I myself used to be a backend developer, so I know firsthand what it means to do all these things. And I also know the use, so like the benefits of having someone else paving the road for you, where you can build on top of something else and you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. And we want our teams to be able to own the full application lifecycle, as I mentioned, and we want them to be able to take care of all these steps. And when I joined, these are the few of the things that they had to do. So they had to care about CI, they had to care about CD, load balancing of the applications, the runtime, the business logic, the metrics, the auth, the logging and security, and all of these things. All the teams have to care about all this. But when we're looking at what's really difference between applications, what different one microservice from another, is really just the business logic. So if we can make it easier for the developers to focus the time in the purple box and less in the gray boxes, that means that they can focus on things that actually deliver value for the company. We try to approach this via creating a golden path or a paved road. And it is like a way of creating a platform that solves the common needs and allows developers to focus on what is important. So I think this image is very useful because either you can follow the paved road that other people have walked before and it's very easy to follow. You can see how maybe it's not straight, but it's at least you can follow it. Or you can burn through the bushes and you probably come out with scratches on the other side. And we want to avoid the number of scratches people have to have, and we want to make it as easy as possible to follow the road. And we want to focus on the common needs because we also acknowledge that our platform can't solve all the problems. But if we can solve like 80% of the problems, then we make the life so much easier. And if we can solve maybe 90% or whatever, then we can solve it even better. As long as we don't create a lock-in to our platform, like as long as we don't enforce developers that they have to follow our platform, it doesn't matter that we don't solve 100% of the use cases. Because they are still free to choose their own path. If they want to burn through the bushes, it's up to them. But they also have to accept the consequences of not following the paved road. And that might mean such things as not easily getting updates or security patches when something is happening. They might be responsible for handling the migration themselves without a lot of help if that's needed. And they have to take a bigger responsibility in maintaining and driving the development of their applications. But if they follow the paved road, if they're part of the 80% use case, it should be very easy for them to do so. And having that free choice and making those kind of decisions, it also means that we have to think about platform as a product. I heard a lot of people when they talk about platform and when you come and talk, they go like, oh, so you mean like a DevOps team, or you mean infrastructure team, or you mean an operations team. And for me, those are very different things. Because if you're working on operations or infrastructure, maybe you just build and you make sure there's a cloud. If someone asks for clouding resources, then they get them, etc. But what I talk about, when I talk about platform, I think about it as a product. You're building a product for your internal developers. That means that you have to treat it as a product. You have to do customer discovery. But the good part is your customers can't hide. They're your coworkers. You see them by the coffee machine. When you ask them for feedback, it gets very awkward when you come and ask for the 5th time and they say like, no, I'm just going to. And you also have to do deliveries in small iterations. You have to focus on getting that quick feedback so you know that you're solving the right problems, that you're providing actual value. When you do changes, did you make things better or worse? Check that, get that feedback, and do a new iteration. You also have to maintain the monitoring. It's not fire and forget. You can't. It's also very common, I've seen it. People do like a new nice product and then something needs to happen and it's like, yeah, you have to migrate to this new thing we built over here. That is the new paved road. But if you are on the paved road, you should get the help to stay on the paved road. You shouldn't have to do like big custom changes to get there. I think it's also important to look at onboarding and teaching and making sure that your product is usable and that it's easy for people to use it and learn and understand how to do so. And that brings me to platform versus enablement. So we structured it that we have a team that called platform engineering that is part of the engineering enablement product area. And if you're familiar with team topologies, they have 4 key concepts when it comes to team structures. And one of them is stream-aligned teams, and they are aligned to work to a flow of work from usually a segment of the business domain. You have complicated subsystem teams where significantly mathematics, calculations, technical expertise is needed. It's usually like the special use cases that don't really fit into everything else. You have the enabling team that helps a stream-aligned team to overcome obstacles, also detects missing capabilities. And you have the platform team, a grouping of other team types that provide a compelling internal product to accelerate delivery by stream-aligned teams. This is from the website, teamtopologies.com/keyconcepts. I really like the provide a compelling internal product to accelerate delivery by stream-aligned teams, because that's really what we're trying to do here. As a small team, we take on the approach of building both platform as product, but also to enable our streamlined teams to deliver more value faster. For us, it's very important to combine those two, and I think the reason why we actually succeeded in what we did has been to help our developers to actually start using things that we do and like unlock the full potential of the platform. Because in the end, why do we have developers? It's because they create business value. And as a company, we want to create business value so we can sell a compelling product, earn some money, and everyone is happy. Unless you have a different goal. But most companies want to earn money. That reminds me, how many in this audience consider or identify themselves to be developers? Okay, that's almost everyone. Is there anyone identifying as a platform engineer? That's a few. And anyone else identifying as anything else? A few, yeah. Cool. How many here feel that they are giving a platform to work with, like a platform that improves their developer experience in the current role? That's not that many. So take your notes, bring them back, and talk to someone. I'm going to tell and connect a little bit more about how being a small team does this, because platform teams are now actually quite common at a lot of companies, and they range from very large to larger. And I've heard of companies that have like hundreds of people working in platform teams, and we are like 3. So we need to actually make some choices that impacts on how we can act. And some uncomfortable insights, or at least it was for me when I started out, is that you cannot do all the things. Like you go to tech conferences, you hear all the cool people talk about all the cool stuff they do, and you think like, great, I want to do that as well. And then you realize, okay, they have a full 10-people team dedicated to just this single functionality. And we have 3 people in total. We can't do that and that and that and that. So you can't do all the things. You have to figure out what things you need to do, and you have to know where to spend your focus. And sometimes it's actually valuable to not do something. Because every time you do something, it takes time, it takes effort. And for instance, if you're not sure what the solution should be and you start spinning out on that, maybe you take your developers to a spin as well. You go like, yes, I think we need this thing, and you drag them along on a long thing, and then you realize that this was not the right thing, we should do something else. And then you spend a lot of time. I know, it was funny, right? Upgrades are frequent and take time. It's like Kubernetes, we use Kubernetes for our runtime, and they do 4 releases every year. And then there are security patches in between, etc. And for every tool you use, they also have a similar release pattern, which means that if you're not careful and adopt too many tools, you will just spend all your time upgrading things. And you probably don't need a service mesh or any other of the cool techs that other people use. Think about what is the right tech for you and the situation you are in, and your architecture, whatever your product is doing. I think there was someone else mentioning this as well, like, think about your use case and make the decision out of that, not what other people are doing. So for me, when I joined Kognic back 3 years ago, it was really hard because I'm a developer at core, and developers love solving problems. So we see something and we think about, okay, I know a solution that can work for that. And before really fully grasping what the problem is, you already have 3 different solutions that you want to try out. For me, it was really hard to not jump to assumptions, to just fully understand and grasp where we were and what we had before trying to act on it. And something that really worked for me to be able to counter that was to think about it as something that I call this low effect magnet. So this is a mental model that I realized 2 weeks ago that I've been using. And it's basically about trying to absorb one problem at a time and one area that we want to improve. So you take one thing in, then you improve it, you streamline it, you make it a paved road, and then you take on the next thing. The reason why this worked for me when I joined was because we did not have ongoing fires at Kognic. I mean, it was not perfect, but a lot of things were already working. There was a solution in place. It might not be the long-term solution we want, but it worked okay-ish. So rather than taking on all the things that we could do as a team, we picked one thing, streamlined it, picked the next thing, streamlined it, and then moved on like that. And I think that that was a better idea also because if we would have not done that, we could have, the expectations would have been like, you are going to fix it. And rather than us saying we take on all the things and then not be able to work on them, because we were only that many people, we couldn't work on all the things at once. It was better people didn't expect things to happen on it and that they should continue in the okay-ish situation. So in hindsight, this explaining probably would have worked better for explaining to the developers our approach, rather than coming, when they came and asked, is this something for your team? And I said like, yeah, not yet, maybe later. And then 2 years later, I was like, why are you not giving this me? And they were like, but you didn't want it. It's like, then I didn't want it, now I want it. So this would probably have been a better model in hindsight. Another thing that was easier to formulate in hindsight was our strategy. And it looks very simple, but I feel like it's impactful. And that is remove time-consuming tasks and bottlenecks. I said it sounds simple, and it's just, actually, it's like 2 lines and very large text. It is this simple. We did it through 3 steps. The first one is unblocking the developers. A blocked developer is not autonomous and cannot drive the full ownership of their product lifecycle. If we unblock them, they are able to move forward, and they can do the things that they need to do. Remove time-consuming tasks from the team. If we as a platform team are busy with upgrading or busy to do anything, we can't improve new things and we can't take on new things. We want to do as many things as possible, as good as possible. That means that we have to make sure that things that take time for us that we can remove, we should remove. And the third part is remove time-consuming tasks from the developers. The more time we can free up from them, the more streamlined we can make their work to be, the easier it is for them. The reason why they are ordered, the ordering is important. If they're unblocked, they can't do anything, then we have to help them. Then that takes them from us from doing the things that we want to do. Unblock the developers. Remove time from the team. There's no idea trying to remove time from the developers if you don't have any time yourself to do things. Remove time from the team, so the team can act on remove time from the developers. I promised you some real-life examples. I'm going to take you through 3 different tools. One of them is called External DNS. We have a Cert Manager and we have Argo CD. They are all CNCF projects, and they are all open source, and you can probably use them. The first one is External DNS, and we use it to unblock the developers. The reason being that we used to do a lot of prototyping. Being a young company, we of course have a lot of things working, but a working test environment where we can integrate very easily was not one of them. So what happens was that a lot of teams were building new things and pushing them to production. The way we exposed things in production was that we attached a DNS to some endpoint, and then we could be able to use it either as an API or as a front-end thing or whatever. So we build something new, we test it out, and we evaluate. And in those steps, we want to have a new DNS connected, and then if it didn't work out, we want to remove the DNS as well. The thing was that in order to get DNS before we introduced external DNS was that you build your application, you have to deploy it so you can get an IP from your load balancer, then you go to one of the 2 people that has access to change DNS records. One of them was me. And then you wait, because they have to create the DNS for you. If you're lucky, you both gave them the DNS that you wanted and the IP for your service in your first request. Otherwise, I would have to go back and I would be like, hey, nice that you want to deploy a new application. What DNS would you like for your application? And do you have an IP, by the way? And that could be like a few turns back and forth. And then they would get the DNS record and they could keep developing. We want to remove the blocker, so the waiting is not great. The depending on someone else is not great. So we looked at external DNS. By the way, all the links of the things that I have, I will give you a QR code in the end, and I also have scheduled a post in the Slack for room 2 that will have the link in it as well, so you can look there later on if you want it. External DNS, when we started out, was super easy to install. I honestly believe that we spent 2 weeks in total on the work of introducing and migrating to external DNS. And that was when we were 2 people in the team because we were still recruiting. And what we did was that we got a token for our DNS provider, which was Cloudflare, and we basically started up running it. The way external DNS works is that in addition to your A record or CNAME record for pointing to your service, it also keeps track with a TXT record that tells this is the information about this service, and I'm the one owning it, so I know that I should update it and handle this one. And what we did for making this work out was that we had to introduce a one-time investment in migration. And so we figured out what we had, because it was not only what was committed in Git, some of it was running live edit in a cluster, a few things were domain was registered or like DNS records registered that no longer used because the application was removed, etc. So there was some cross-mapping done. Then we created an annotation in the service configuration with the DNS record. And this is basically how the developers were handling it later on when they wanted to create a new service. That is basically the line that says external DNS alpha Kubernetes IO hostname hello.argo.domain.com. That line is basically all that is needed in order to get a new DNS record. But since we were already tracking these ones, we want to make sure that external DNS didn't accidentally remove them or those kind of things. So first, we made sure that it looked like the developers had done the right thing to start with. And then we added the TXT record into Cloudflare and that we faked. We pretended to be external DNS adding it. And that was quite simple with a lot of API calls and some really ugly bash scripts. And then we deployed external DNS into the cluster, and that was a success. Basically, then external DNS picked up all the records. It saw that everything was matching towards the cluster and what it was supposed to be, and it was happy. And when someone updated their service configuration with either adding a new DNS or removing an old one, external DNS made sure to update that into Cloudflare as well. So in the end, the process for the developers when they wanted to create a new DNS record was to build their application, deploy the application with annotation, get the DNS record, and keep developing without any blocker. So if we're looking at a return on investment on this one, I would say that it was self-serve, which is really good. It's what we're looking for. And the feedback from the developers was that it was very easy to use. It was intuitive, it was easy to get started, and it was easy to continue with. When it comes to like the return on investment and we're looking at the investment versus the effect with a high and low, we would say that the investment was very low. As I mentioned, it took 2 weeks, about 2 weeks. And the result is the effect was very high because we have basically not looked at this since it's just working. I love things that just work. Second up is Cert Manager. And this I classify as removing time-consuming tasks from the team. The reason was that we are using Let's Encrypt for certificates. And certificates and Let's Encrypt need to be updated every 90 days, which means that in reality, you want to update them every 60 days, because if they expire, you're in a very bad situation. So you would rather have some time to work on that. And that meant that we had a calendar event every other month that says, remember to update these certificates and roll them out. And we had the process like that looked like having a custom shell script in a local terminal, which created new certificates. It connected you to Let's Encrypt, did some magic, and then you got a new certificate. We also had the certificates expiring inside the deployments in Kubernetes, which meant that we had to, it was loaded in as a secret, and secrets are loaded in at Upstart. So we had to manually edit all the secrets and then have all the applications restart in order to get the new certificate. And while it was not, I mean, it's not like it was a super big work every time, but it was something that happened regularly. It was something that took cognitive load, and it was something that was a lot of manual steps. And we did want to remove the manual steps because that's like a room for error. So we looked at Cert Manager, and it once again, so I feel like I'm like doing promotion or something. It is very easy to set up. It takes very little effort to get it up and running. And there are really good examples on how to configure it on the official repository. And this YAML file, I'm not sure if it's readable from the back, but basically what it says, it's 5 lines. Out of 1 is gathering source from remote repository. And this is basically what we needed to add to our Kubernetes cluster in order to get Cert Manager up and running. It's one additional file that is a little bit custom where we say that we use Let's Encrypt and Cloudflare. So we connect those two, and Cert Manager can also track multiple DNS zones, which is really nice. So if you use, for instance, .com and .net or something like that, you can have them play nicely with each other. And it plays very nice with Ingress resources. Ingress resources is another Kubernetes function that allows you to proxy. It's basically Nginx, if you're aware of what that is. And it allows you to route traffic differently, which meant that we could move the certificates from the deployments to the Ingress object, and we didn't have to restart all the applications every time we want to upgrade the certificates. That was something that was very appreciated when we could do that. So the process after we introduced Cert Manager was that we did nothing. We basically don't touch certificates since we introduced Cert Manager. Once again, I really like things that doesn't take any time. So the return on investment is it removed manual process, less cognitive load for the team, and no rolling restarts of all the things. Very low investment, and maybe actually also low effect, but in the end, it felt worth it. Medium result, I would say. So the third thing I want to talk about, last but not least, is remove time-consuming tasks from developers using Argo CD. Argo CD is a GitOps tool that you can use for rolling out deployments using GitOps. And the deployment process for the teams for deploying a new application to Kubernetes before we introduced it was that the build pipeline posted to a Slack channel. And it posted like built application with image tag X at this timestamp. So the developers picked up the image from Slack, and then they ran, once again, a magical script locally with the new image tag and application name. And in the background, this script did kubectl set image, so it live updated the image into the cluster. And set image triggers a new rollout restart of the deployment because it wants to make sure that all the pods running are running the new version. So then the script ran rollout status to see how that was going. And when that was done, it posted back to Slack and said the deployment happened of this service. The problem with this was that it was a black box for the developers. They didn't know that it did kubectl set image in the background. They didn't know what the rollout thingy was. So whenever something happened, they could not debug it. They didn't know how to figure out what went wrong. So they came to the platform team and they were like, okay, the deployment failed again. I don't know why. And either was like they copy-pasted the wrong image tag, or they misspelled the application name, or something else happened. And in the end, it was like really hard for them to understand what happened. They also had like a very limited knowledge about underlying Kubernetes resources, so that the image tag actually needed to map a container that was pushed to the container registry was not something that was transparent to them. Another thing that really kept me up at night was that we did not have any version control of Kubernetes resources, and that is the deployments running into the cluster. We could not see what was currently deployed, or actually you could if you checked in cluster, but if someone accidentally deleted the cluster, not that anyone ever deleted production, right? Then you would not know what to restore. There was no way to see that. Or maybe you could go through Slack logs and hopefully you could find it in all that mess. But you can see if anyone changed number of replicas, you can see if someone changed resource request or any of the other things. So it was hard to know what is deployed and why. It's also hard to changing a configuration because you didn't know if the thing that was committed to Git was the thing that was actually also running, because we had a few things in Git, but sometimes were updated, sometimes they were not, because there was nothing enforcing that. And we had no way to restore. And that's scary. So what we wanted to do, well, we wanted to get more transparency for the developers, a way to, once again, self-serve, be able to move forward by themselves and not depend on others. We want to spend less time debugging failures because it was several times a week someone failed a deployment and they didn't know why. And we wanted to create more resilience in the system and be able to recover. So, I mean, what can give us that, right? Introducing GitOps. How many in this room feel that they are deploying using GitOps? Okay, good. I will describe what GitOps means, and you will maybe see why I think it's a good idea. GitOps has a definition that says that it should be declarative. A system managed by GitOps must have its desired state expressed declaratively, and that is like in code or something similar. It should be versioned and immutable. Desired state is stored in a way that enforces immutability, versioning, and retains a complete version history. It should also be pulled automatically. Software agents automatically pull the desired state declarations from the source. So you don't have to push anything anywhere. If you push it to Git, then it's there, and then the agents should pull it themselves. And it should be continuously reconciled. Software agents continuously observe actual system state and attempt to apply the desired state. That means that if reality doesn't match what is declared, then the system should try to make that happen. And if you want to read more about GitOps, I can really recommend this page. It was launched about a year ago. It's called opengitops.dev, and it's I will have the link with the rest of the things later on. And they describe the way of thinking around this in way better than I can do, even though I actually pulled this from there. And there are some really good talks around it as well, and I have a link for that as well. If we're looking at what can solve this, it's surprise, surprise, Argo CD. So the way we solved it was, I mean, YAML files. Everyone loves YAML files, right? So if we just put everything in YAML files, we have it declarative. And if we push those YAML files to GitHub, then we have it versioned and immutable. And if we, Argo CD is by definition pulling automatically and then also continuously reconciling with the system. And you can read more about Argo CD on the project site, but it's fulfilling all the needs that we have in order to get GitOps, which is really nice. So we looked at migrating for this, and it was a lot of work, I would say. This was not a 2 weeks fix of the external DNS. It was a little bit more work. So first of all, we had to figure out what is really running in the cluster, and is that what we want running? And then we had to add it to a GitHub repository where we could track it. And then we had to set up Argo CD with sync disabled, because we want to make sure that Argo CD didn't try to apply things if it was not right, if we had missed something when we had added it to GitHub. Then we announced a migration window for the developers, like after this date, you can't use the local script anymore because then things will break, and it's a very bad idea. And then we enable sync after migration window. And was it a success? I'll get back to that. The process afterwards was that the developers got the latest master image tag, and we also got them like a nicely wrapped script to get it from GCR, so they could like give me the latest image tag for this container. And then they could add it to the Git repository, and they could push. I actually accidentally switched to earlier because that's the last thing we had. Result was we had a much more transparent process. It was easy for developers to figure out what went wrong and where. They understood, they had to learn a lot more about the underlying resources, but that also helped them to be more self-contained and self-serving when it came to handling the deployments. It was we had resilience, we could restore if we needed to, and it was fairly easy to use. The investment was somewhat high. I can't lie, like we actually had to plan and perform and do a lot of things. But the result was also very high. And once we had done this, we actually haven't had to do a lot of things with this in a very long time. This was 2 years ago, and it's mostly just working, which is, once again, super nice. So in the long run, I would say that the investment was low compared to how much effect we got out over time. Getting back to the small star, I think we somewhat failed the rollout of GitOps to the teams. They were not very happy for a period of time because we removed something they knew about. They actually kind of liked the deploy script because it fulfilled their needs. They felt like, I like saying just deploy application image tag. That feels very easy. Why do I have to go to a repository and know a lot about YAML files and all these other things that I don't really understand? What is all these things that you're forcing me to do? And we should have made sure to ensure that we had buy-in before doing this thing. We should explain the things that I told you now. What is the problem? What are we trying to solve? And why do we think this is the way forward? And I think this has been a really good learning for us. And we have definitely chosen a better approach to large changes in the since then. But while it was not that well received the first month, within 4 months, we actually got a message that said, kudos to Plating and their work on making my life as easier as a developer. Argo CD together with automatic DNS and all that good stuff really helped me today. And this is what we're trying to achieve. This is what we want to have. We want developers to feel like their life is so much easier. And it made me really happy. And it was really good that we got there in the end. I think we could have gotten there earlier if we had taken care to do change management for introducing the change of GitOps to the teams. In the end, the things that we more or less stopped thinking about is DNS records, certificates, and deployments. What's up with all the stores? Well, this is true until you do a rebranding and you have to get a new domain for all your applications and you have to migrate everything to a new domain and you have like 50 microservices that everyone has their own DNS record and all the things. But I also believe that if we had not done this work, the migration and the rebranding effort would have been so much harder than it was for us because a lot of these things were much easier to handle when we already had external DNS and certificates and GitOps in place. So while we don't really know what is going to be the next step, what will be our next GitOps transformation equal impact for the teams, we do know that we will try to take it on by unblocking the developers, removing time-consuming tasks from the team, and removing time-consuming tasks from the developers. And that's all I have for today. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. Mostly, the question was, how do you handling prototyping and deployment of new services right now? And I would say that most of the time, a lot of the prototyping, especially if you don't have any clients on that part of the product yet, we might deploy it straight into production and use some kind of feature totaling to limit it to internal users only. And we still encourage to do quick iterations and rather get something out and trying it fast than go through like very large test or integration environments. Was that the answer to your question? Thank you. Cool. If anyone wants to chat, you are welcome to come up. In like 12 minutes, the message will go out in Slack with the links and everything. Let me know if you want to talk. Thank you.